Oh, hey guys, it's still me. I'm still Ryan, and we're still building this website, elm-spa.dev, together from scratch in the guide. So if you saw the last part, we used elm-spa init to create a new project. We used elm-spa add to create a docs page, and now we're kind of in this docs page. And the next thing that I want to do is I want to make a hero component. So a hero, if you're not familiar with that, because it's not a word people say, is basically on the splash page. I'm going to show you a secret. Before I published this site, I had it deployed to Netlify. So we're going to make this hero that we reuse from page to page here. So the guide uses it, elm-spa uses it. The docs actually doesn't use it because it's got this sidebar thing. You know what? Maybe we should. Yeah, let's make the guide first. So how do we make the guide? We do it the same way we made the docs. I'm going to hit up arrow, and instead of doing docs, I'm just going to type guide. And that's it. So now our guide's there. If we go back to our app, the docs link takes us to docs. Let's go back to our nav bar, and let's add a route for guide. Guide goes here. Guide goes there. So now we've got a link to guide. And what's really cool about Elm is if it compiles, it usually you're in a good spot. So if you make a simple typo, like something you might do in JavaScript or HTML or CSS, you're not going to know about it until someone tries to click your link and then things don't work. But here, Elm will not compile unless you are actually using valid variables. That being said, if you use a string and you make a typo here, that will compile, right? Because it just thinks that you really wanted the link label to be good, which you probably did. So that's cool. So yeah, so we click on guide. We're back in that initial page that we saw before. I'm a little bit zoomed in here, but let's make this thing. So the font that I'm using here, I think I'm using Source Sans Pro, which if you were there in the old days, that's what the Elm website used to use before they were all like IBM Plex Sans in your face. And in order to make this not look too legit, I didn't want to straight copy IBM Plex Sans. So I'm back to Source Sans Pro. That was a complete tangent that I didn't need to go on, but now you know. So all these fonts are wrong. Let me go to my layout and let's make our layout use the same font across the board. You might notice when I hit enter and I save, things are like sometimes snapping into place and sometimes not. They're supposed to be formatting, but as I'm recording a stream and running a dev server, there's a little bit of lag. So sometimes you'll see that happen. But what I need to do is I need to use this font thing to introduce a new font family. And external is what I'm going to do. I'm going to use a Google font. I'll go get the URL in a sec. And then what else does external take? The name. Oh wow, it even has a link in the docs for fonts.google. That's actually convenient because because that's exactly what I'm going to do. Let's just steal their example. Maybe I don't even have to go to Google. 400 count as 600. I don't know. That's like the font weights. You're not supposed to know this. This is just something I do too much of, so I think that's right. We'll find out in a sec. Source Sans Pro. You might notice that this font family thing that we specified here was a list. That's so that the fallback is. Oh wow, it actually worked. Okay, this is Source Sans Pro. It's a list so that you can have fallback fonts. So you can say like, yo, if I didn't get Source Sans Pro, like for example, if I made a typo here, it'll fall back to the sans serif that we saw. So that's like the sans serif that we had. Or if you wanted to have like a serif or something like that, that would be the fallback. But assuming that our font loads, that's what it'll look like. We're going to be using Source Sans Pro for the site. Cool. So our headers are spaced out by 24. This is a tiny boy. This is a really tiny site. Let's reduce the space in between the links. I'll bring them together a little bit. Elm UI deals with spacing and padding. It doesn't deal with margins. So spacing is the space between things, and padding is the space around things. So this row here We're saying we want 32 above all these links, like up here, and we want 16 on the left. So when we collapse things, it's going to have some space. It'll have 16 pixels on the left here, 16 on the right, and then as you see, the 0 on the bottom. So we can be explicit about what we want our padding to look like. Cool. So that's that. I want to make this home link a little bit bigger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, instead of specifying the font size here, I'm going to take that out. And it'll, inherit from the parent whatever the font size is. Oops. So let's make docs and guide a little bit smaller here. We can just add an elements. We can do like view small link if we want. We do whatever we want. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to wrap all this stuff on the left. Oops. These elements, and then just say font.size is going to be 16 pixels for these two. And then docs and guide should be smaller, and then home will be bigger. And home I'm going to replace with elm-spa, if I can spell. And so that's what you're going to do. So when we click that, we'll go to the home page. When we click this, we'll go to the docs. When you click this, we'll go to the guide. Let's get that hero. So right now, our top is using this code. And I kind of like this code. This is pretty much doing what I want to do. I'm using center Y right now, which is just kind of showing off how Elm-UI works. But instead, I could do something like padding XY. Say on the left and right, I want 16 pixels, but on the top and bottom, I want something big, like 128. And that'll basically add spacing all around this. So let's say this is a hero we want. Maybe in this case, instead of elm-spa, you're doing great already. We'll say elm-spa, single page apps made easy. That's the tagline there. The spacing, we can tighten that up a bit. So this is the column of the header and the title. So now these guys got a little bit closer. And then learn more is this link at the bottom, which will take you to this URL. For now, I'm going to just get rid of this. And we're just going to focus on reusing this hero. So everything here that I've kind of demoed here is like a reusable component that we might want to use somewhere else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say all that stuff is going to be a function called hero. So heroes actually don't send messages out, so they're just going to use the generic type. But our view is going to say, hey, I want the title to say elm-spa, and I want the description to be single page apps made easy. So now our hero is going to take in arguments. So it's going to take in a record, like it's a title, which is a string, and a description, which is also a string. And then here we get those options. So we can say, instead of hard coding elm-spa, we can say options.title. And instead of hard coding single page apps made easy, we can say options.description. And what's cool about that is now we can use this as many times as we want, right? So like in this page, if we wanted to have a bunch of these heroes, we don't have to type out all that code over and over and over again. We've just moved it into a function, and that's pretty common now. You'll just, if you want to reuse something, you'll just put it in a function. So I can, make that same hero twice stacked on top of each other because I use column. And I got to make the width full width if I'm going to do that. So I can reuse that like that, but what's cool is I can make it say anything. So I can make it say, hey, dash spa, which is a competing SPA framework. Just kidding. Cool. So that wasn't for me to use. The reason I did that was so, and I'm going to do this and format the code with Elm format. Normally that happens on save, but when I'm recording all this stuff, it's a little bit laggy. Cool. So let's take this and let's reuse it on the guide page, right? So how do we do that? Well, it's a function. So all we have to do is let's just make, we can make a component if we wanted to. We can make a new file here called hero. All I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new file called ui.elm. And I usually just do that for simple things that I want to reuse. So every file is just a module, and you get to choose what functions it exposes, what kind of imports it needs. So I'm going to import the element, which is elm-ui. I'm going to expose all that stuff because it's useful to me. And then I'm going to also import font, exposing that. And then let's steal the code that we wrote here and see what we're missing, right? So I'm going to save this. That's going to freak out because it's saying you took away hero. I'm going to paste it here. Looks like that's okay. I'm just going to do some indentation here. So this is all good. It's exposing hero. So now what top has to do is it has to import UI, which is that module we just made together. And then instead of hero, what we're going to do is we're going to type in ui.hero. And that's even what Elm recommends to do if you look at the errors over there on the right. So once we do that, we've got elm-spa here. But more importantly, when we go to our guide, we can just import UI. And that's it. We're reusing our code, and we just put it in a file. No HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. It's all just one language, and we can just copy, paste, and move styles and content wherever we want. So guide, and I don't remember what the guide says. The guide says, videos coming soon. Maybe that won't be true when I share these videos. Let's do stuff. That's subject to change. We'll see. Cool. So that's it. So we've got our hero being reused here. We've got it being reused here. I think on the home page for the actual site we're trying to build, we want to call to action here. And we want it to be this cool button, right? So let's add a cool button to our hero. How would we do that, right? So I think the way I planned to do it was, well, these font sizes are all wrong. Let's actually steal the design of the site that we built. So the font size is 64. I'm going to go to my UI thing. I'm going to say font.size is 64. Inspect this. The font size of that is 24. So here we're going to say font.size is 24. Looks like the alpha is, yeah, it's 0.5. Okay, good enough for me. So now that's right. And then I'm going to just center all these things here and format our document so that things don't look gross. Cool, cool, cool. And then maybe that 12 spacing does make sense now. Great. Okay. And then let's add a button in, right? So maybe another piece of reusable UI that I want is a button. So normally if I'm going to use a button and I only think I'm going to use it in one place, I'm just going to add it in that place. So here I'm going to make another parameter come into hero. So sometimes you're going to have buttons, sometimes you're not. So if there's going to be none, we can just do an empty list. But maybe there's a button and the label is just learn more. And when you click it, it's supposed to take you to the guide. Yeah, so I can just do that. I'm going to save this here. And our hero function from before is going to be like, whoa, what's going on? Hero doesn't expect to take buttons in yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, now you do. I'm going to format this guy. And we're basically going to tell it, hey, you're also going to take in buttons, which is going to be a list of tuples. So a string and then a string. So basically the string on the left is going to be the label, the string on the right is going to be the URL. And if we do have buttons, we're going to render them underneath here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if, I'm going to say all this stuff here is going to be two lists put together. So if list.isEmpty buttons, then I'm just going to turn an empty list. If not, I'm going to return something else. So I'm going to save this. Oops, that's going to get options.buttons, right? Let me format this guy. Cool. And this is my Elm Analyze saying, if you're just going to put an item in front of it, use this. This is just a prepend of value in the front. It's really not that important, but I didn't want that yellow warning to get in the way of what we're doing here. So if we do have a list of buttons, what we're going to do is we're going to do list.map, and we're going to view a button. And then we're just going to pass in buttons. So view button is going to take in one of these. So I'm going to type that in, view button. If you give me that, I'm going to give you back an element. So the button is going to have the label and the URL. And then here we can make it, just say the label for now. So what's it upset about? Buttons. It's a list of strings to strings. It's upset that the guide isn't doing this, right? So let's go to the guide. We'll see here that the guide isn't passing in buttons. And since the guide doesn't actually have any things, we've got learn more here, but if we go to the guide, we don't have any buttons there, right? So let's make that learn more button look like the button on the elm-spa dev design that we have. Cool, so not just font, I'm going to need a few more things from Elm UI. I'm going to need background, that's going to let me set background colors. I'm going to need a border, that's going to let me round the edges, and that's going to make the button look like it's clickable. And then here, I'm also going to need input, or no, not link, I think is what I'm going to use here. So link takes in a list of like those style attributes, but it also takes in a URL and a label. So here we can just use the URL and the label that we got from our parameters here. So each button passed in its string and its label and its URL. So let's start by making the background color RGB. I don't remember what coral is. I'm just gonna guess it's like a lot of red going on. Maybe not that much red. Green, yeah. Not that much blue. We'll see what that color is. And then the font color is going to be white. So that's going to be, oops, 255 is what I want. 255. The white is going to be all maxed out. Cool. And this is upset because labels a string. Ooh, that's not the color. Let's take a look at what is the color we're using for our layout, right? So our layout is using this for the coral, so let's reuse that here. In fact, let's take it and let's make it a variable, right? So I've got this function that's returning these random numbers. I could copy paste the random numbers around, or what I can do is I can say colors.coral, and it'll be like, all right, well, where are you getting those colors from? Let's actually export them from our UI thing. So here I'm going to just assume that UI is going to expose a record called colors. And then we're just going to keep track of the color palette that we use here. So colors is going to be that, coral, and white. I think those are the types. I don't know. We don't have to know everything. We can just type, and then usually the compiler will tell us if we're being stupid. Beep, bop, boop, 255, 255, 255. Great. So I save that. That compiles now, which is good. So our nav bar is still using that color, but let's use the color here. So instead of me typing out on my button all these things, I can say the background color is colors.coral. And the font color is colors.white. So that's kind of nice. Corals, colors.white. So now we've got these really nice names, and we can control our color palette in the app in one spot. So that's kind of a button. When I click it, it goes to the guide, right? But it doesn't look like a button yet. So let's give it some padding, and let's give it some rounded edges. So padding XY. Usually the buttons I make will have a little bit more padding on the edges. So let's say 24, and not so much padding on the top and bottom. Maybe something like 8 pixels. So that's starting to look more like a button, right? What can I do? Yeah, we want to round the edges. Border.radius. We're going to give it a radius of 4, so it kind of has rounded. Oops, that's not it. what I want is border.rounded. So that'll give it rounded edges. I'm using my CSS knowledge to guess the wrong property names here. So now when I have this, it's starting to look like a button, but if you noticed, I actually got it wrong, right? We only want it to look like that when you're hovering over it, and when you're not hovering over it, we want it to be white with coral border. So let's correct that, right? So what I want it to do is I want this to be the colors when I'm hovering, right? So normally the background color is going to be white. I'm going to have a border color. I'm super glad we made those variables now because we are typing a lot. We're using that coral color a lot. We also want the font to be coral. So let's save that and see where we're at. Okay, and the border doesn't have any width, so if we give it a width of something like 2, hopefully we'll see some edge on there. Perfect. And then I think the font size is too big, so I'm going to make it 14. I think that's what it is. It might be 16 in the actual site. I don't know. We'll mess around with that later. But we don't have the hover effect working yet because we haven't used mouse over. So if we paste those properties we had before, now when we mouse over, we're going to see that effect. You'll notice that there's a smooth transition effect. The way I get transitions with Elm UI is I actually I have a property that I make, transition, and I'll say what properties I care about. So I care about color, and I care about background color. And I want them to transition in 200 milliseconds. So if I save this, it's going to be like, what's transition? Transition is a helper function that I'm going to make. It's going to take in an int, which is the milliseconds, and a list of strings, which is all the properties that I want. So let's just define that here. That's the milliseconds, and then these are the properties. And at the end, I should give back an attribute so that I can use it in my component. So this is the duration. The list of strings are going to be the properties. And then what I can do with Elm UI is I can say element.attribute, and I can give it an HTML attribute and override and kind of use HTML and CSS where I need it. So I'm just going to say, let's import HTML, and we're just going to call the attributes thing attr so we can use it here. So I can say attr.style is going to be, let's say I took, so it usually looks something like this in CSS. Transition, then you say the property, so it might be color, 200, and then you say like how you want it to animate. So you could say something like that, and you got to give it units. So if I did this, this would transition the color. You'll see the color fade, but the background flashes, right? Because we didn't include the background. So if you want to do 2 properties, CSS is super weird. You're going to do something like this. And you're going to say, all right, the transition style is going to have these 2 properties. Notice all that duplication. We're going to get rid of it because we're just going to make the function do it. So this is the behavior we want, but we're not actually using the variables that we passed in. And actually, Elm Analyze is telling us about that. So what I need to do is I need to generate this text based on what I got, right? So let's use a pipeline. So in Elm, the way you build values is you just call functions. And normally what you do is you start with a value, and then you pass it into these pipelines that transform it. So initially I've got a list here. So let's take a look at this, right? I've got color and I got background color. And what I want to do is I want to turn it into this, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call list.map. So for each property I get, what I want to do is I want to return a string that kind of looks like this, right? But instead of color always, I want to have prop plus plus. Cool. So that would be like color 200 milliseconds ease out, and then background color 200 milliseconds ease out. And then if I wanted to make this a variable, I would do something like this. And since it's an integer and I'm using it with strings, I have to say from int, I'll say what my duration is. And finally, all my properties, I want to join them together with this. So I'm just going to say string.join, and that should be it. So now we can do all kinds of things. We can say, hey, I want to do, opacity or something like that. But we've got this helper function that returns a elm-UI attribute, and we don't have to worry about that silly CSS property and all this stuff every time. We can just call it with normal variables, and we can reuse this as much as we want. So I'm happy with that. Cool. You might notice one thing. This thing isn't centered. So how do we center something with elm-UI? We just center it. It's that easy. So I want my buttons to be lined out, and if I give multiple, let's say I just want them to be separated by 8. This is yelling at me because I'm not a clever man. Oh, that's right. I have to put all this inside of a list because that's the type that I returned at the beginning. So now we've got this hero here. We're reusing the code here, but we're not passing in those buttons. We're passing an empty list and guide, so we're not actually showing anything there, which is great. But you can imagine if I wanted to go back to the home page, back to home, I could have something like this, and we're reusing those buttons. And so now I've got like this one hero component that we're using from page to page. It's been a pretty long video, so I'm gonna stop it there. Hopefully I'll see you guys in the next video when we start messing around with page transitions, which is like a super cool, exciting part of elm-spa that you just get out of the box. So thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in a bit.